Hello, one and all, and welcome back to another thrilling episode of Off the Dome. I'm your humble interviewer, Jordan Brown, and with me for the very first time are our noble narrators. Say hi, noble narrators.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Daisy, Joshua. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited. Well, first of all, thank you for supporting Doctors Without Borders, because that is what this started from. And boy, am I tardy to getting all of these taken care of. I owe so many people so many emails. But we this was part of that Doctors Without Borders fundraiser that went stunningly well.
Just fantastically,
yeah. Look, we're not Dimension 20 Fantasy High mini auctions over here. We can't raise. They did 67,000 in the first week. Like we're not doing that. But hey, we didn't do too bad for who we've got.
I think it was close to 20 though, right? And Rundy and
it was
done real well.
Yeah, it ended up being just over 25, I believe.
25.
So
okay.
yeah.
Run started that. I've known Run for a while, and he's a good guy. And
yes,
and
yeah, I was really excited to be part of it. But you all are responsible for the Narrative Universe tabletop role-playing game, a thing that the internet abbreviated immediately to NUT.
Yes.
I think against your wishes.
it might have been a little there.
It was sort of like nothing we could really do at one point in time. It's like as soon as someone said "not RPG," I think both Josh and I were like, "That's it now." What it is now.
Yeah,
I'm good.
Yeah. That's very fun. Yeah. I would love to sort of hear. I haven't gotten to play. I've looked through the book, both the base and the expanding cosmos. But yeah, I would love to hear sort of like how this came together, how this started.
Yeah, I'll let
Do you
you
want to go or
no? You go.
Okay, yeah, sure. So, the narrative universe system got its roots almost 30 years ago from Josh and his group of gaming friends that were looking for a TTRPG that really did what they wanted to do, which was, kind of speed things up a little bit and really focus on the narrative. And they couldn't find one, so they decided to make their own. And now, 30 years later, it has grown into a community of a little over 1,000 people on Discord that have been playing the game for a number of years in sort of this giant public playtest. And they have had a huge influence on the mechanics and the style of the game. And when I came on board almost a year ago, very quickly I fell in love with it. And I spoke with Josh and I was like, hey, if you ever, I love the system. If you ever want to write it down and make it into a manual, just so even people on the Discord can read it themselves. And now, almost a year after that, here we are.
Yeah. Josh, sorry.
Me and my friends, we were, it was second edition time, and we wanted to, make it easier, make it what we wanted it to be. So I picked up a book in a bookstore and read through it that was called TTRPGs for Dummies at the time. And the guy had a practice that he suggested to anybody who was starting who's starting to GM or DM in whatever system. He said, before you touch any system, sit down with a couple friends and take 100-sided dice and just tell a story. And every time you come to a conflict, just roll 100-sided dice against each other. And he said, from that simple activity, you will see how dynamic, how varied, how much fun a particular, just that entire interaction can be. And then you can go back to the system you're using, and it'll give you fresh eyes. It'll also let you see maybe what mechanics are and aren't necessary for the game to run. And I still, to this day, anytime somebody is a new GM or if somebody's developing a TTRPG system, I'm a pro GM. I've been using my system exclusively for 10 years. We're, scaling my business, Daisy and I are. It's been really successful. So a lot of people want to create their own system. They ask me advice, and I give them that exact same advice. And just take 2-3 people, roll 100-sided dice against each other, and that mechanic, that activity, became the center of what we did in our game, which was called the Fate Roll. and that kind of picked up and changed everything we did and has informed everything I've done from that day on. And that became the roots of what we call the narrative universe now. I called the Orsac narrative universe for a long, long time.
Yeah. This is, so I have a D100, like a true D100. It's so silly, because it basically, if you don't have like a box to roll it in, it just basically doesn't stop rolling because it's just a ball. But I never get to roll it. And then, like, of course, like the 1 in a million times I'm playing or running a game and a D100 roll is needed, it's nowhere near me. And I'm like, well, I'll roll my 2d10s and just try to figure out the math on that. But yeah, I love a D100, because it is, I love, I think it was like in one of the Matt Colville supplements where he was talking about like, hey, here's this like wild thing that could happen, but remember, your players have an equally good chance of getting a 100 and a 1. So like, don't roll this if it's not, like something that you're willing to have be wildly like disparate results. But yeah, sort of in line with that. Yeah, can you explain the fate rolls, the D100's addition to it?
Yeah, I'll let Daisy. Daisy's really good at explaining how the mechanic works.
Sure. Yeah, it honestly is the mechanic that I fell in love with as someone who runs a lot of games, because essentially what it does is it kind of makes preparing very heavily for your game not impossible, but not necessary, because whenever you come up to a situation when a fate roll is needed, that sort of determines the outcome of actions. So what the fate roll does is it separates out the success of a character's action from the narrative consequence of that action. So you can succeed on what you are trying to do and have very bad results from it. Or you can fail forwards and become folly-esque heroes. And it makes for some really fun and interesting moments that it kind of includes the narrator in on the fun of everything. It makes you not so much the, person sort of like just taking notes and following the script as much as you are an engaged player on the table, because you don't know what's going to happen or really where exactly the story is going to take us.
Yeah, it's super cool. Yeah, I should, I guess, point out the GM/DM position is called narrator for this universe. Yeah, it seems like such a fun mechanic. I know, Josh, you mentioned you were playing 2E when you sort of started building this. What did you see as sort of like the impediments or the things that you wanted to, like, I know you talked about like speeding up narrative, stuff like that. Like what was sort of the impetus of like, what was 2E not doing? I think that's the question.
I think one of the things that you felt really strongly about was that the DM was we got into a lot of fights. I come from a pretty rough background, and it's like these people who were playing are not people you would normally like think about playing in TTRPGs, but we did. And there was a lot of like arguments at the table over what or wasn't possible and what was or wasn't allowed. And for us, and that would slow games down as like long-term like conversations about does this make or does it not, and even people getting angry at tables. And that's one of the things that the fate roll really does is if you have two people who have difference of opinions on that, the DM can give odds and roll the 100-sided and see if that makes or not. We also, there were like also, so you have a spell description. What does that spell do? So like this, if you have a fire spell and it only describes that it does damage, and someone wants to use the fire spell to like melt the guts out of a lock, can it do that? How effectively does it do that? None of that stuff is given. And how do you like adjudicate that stuff more effectively and quickly at the table so the story can continue moving rather than having, a 30-minute conversation, which, I mean, I don't know if that's still, I've been using the system now for 28 years. It's all I ever play. So I don't know if that's still a thing. I literally don't know if that's still a thing or not. That happens a lot at table, but I do hear from people who hear about the system that they love the idea that if there's a disagreement, that the dice decide that disagreement instead of the DM just saying yes or just saying no. And I've said to people 1,000 times, one of the things you learn in philosophy, like one of my favorite things a philosopher I ever heard say was it ain't obvious what's obvious. Like what's obvious to one person isn't obvious to another, especially when you're talking about like an imaginary world. So, we were looking into other systems that would allow that kind of stuff to happen. Once I read that book and he gave that activity and I undertook that activity, I was like, this solves our problems. And ever since then, the fate roll, especially we call contested fate rolls, we have 100-sided roll against, allows for like really quick on the fly kind of mechanics that can be made up. And the example I make all the time is Pursuit. I hear that Dungeons and Dragons, I've heard from people, I don't know, doesn't have great pursuit mechanics. But
I can confirm it does not.
It does not. But in my game, we have some of my favorite games I've ever played are just like chase games. Like I once had a group that was in a digging machine, and there was a giant virus that was like drilling. It was in the style of like a bacteriophage, so it was like drilling down under them, and the entire 5 hours was them being like chased, and it was dynamic and it was interesting, and there was because on the fly, I can take the 100-sided roll against. I can take the fate roll, and I can make decisions like minute by minute. Does the bacteriophage encounter a rock maybe that's too big for it because they're smaller? Maybe they're able to get through faster than it because of its size, and I can answer those questions over and over again. Also, if a player has a skill and they're trying to bring it to bear in the moment, like if you have two cars next to each other and the guy is going to try to take a shot at the tires, what skills do you have? How does that really work at that speed? And I can assign like just a number, a bonus for one side or the other on their fate rolls. That allows me to create like a moving and dynamic scene that relies on that 100-sided roll against and that fate roll system. And I can do that in a million different ways for a million different issues, problems, or disagreements that might come up at the table. And so, yeah, stuff like that is extraordinarily useful.
Yeah. I would say like as someone who GMs for a lot of folks who are like first time players, it kind of like one of the things that I love about first time players, and this is specific to D&D, is they don't know what they can't do yet. Yes. And so like they will try that, like, well, can I fireball the lock off this like door or whatever? I mean, I don't know if I've ever had anyone do that, but it's something where they're like, hey, like you said, literally there was a game where I was like, hey, there's a book golem and it's made of books and it's coming at you. And someone was like, can I cast Gust of Wind to see if I can knock some of the books apart? And I'm like, well, D&D doesn't have a mechanic for that, but yes, of course you can. That's so much fun. And then like on the fly trying to decide like, well, how much damage does that do or whatever. I love that, like, you can lean into that. You don't need a new player, or I find it happens sort of at the extremes of like brand new players who don't know what they can't do and such seasoned players that they know everything that they can do and they know how to like try and twist the wording. I love that the system sort of incorporates that sort of into its core belief of like, no, you can do whatever you want, or I should say, you can try to do whatever you want.
Give it a shot.
Yeah. Honestly, it completely removes that like the may I approach the bench sort of barrier between like you said, using a skill rules as written. We're pretty explicit in the manual before we list the skills that like there are certain mechanics that are very present in Dungeons and Dragons for skills, such as like number of targets and the range for things that we don't incorporate because we want our players to kind of have the freedom to use their skills as creatively as they want to.
Yeah, it makes me think of it's a Critical Role thing. I think it's campaign 1. They like all cross a river and they've all tied each other to like a rope and like to get across the river, and they need to become untied immediately. And Sam Riegel's character casts magic missile at like 8th level or something so that he can fire 10 bolts to hit every knot so that immediately break the rope. And rules as written, that shouldn't work because magic missile only targets creatures. It can't target like a rope. But like Matt Mercer allows it, of course. And it's an incredible moment that has stuck with me forever. I'm like, what a genius use of that spell, of like such a high upcast to be like, no, I need this many targets. Look, it's fantastic. You guys are doing great work. So sort of like you mentioned, like the skills, you do have set skills, and they do hit like some of the same general areas. So I think it feels like this doesn't feel foreign in terms of like, if you're used to like D&D, like jumping into this doesn't feel like I need to learn an entire new system from scratch, like a lot of systems kind of do. I assume intentional, since you're coming from 2E of like, but like, yeah, how did that sort of morph into where it is now?
Sure, good.
I mean, so first thing is that I have TikToks where I claim I will never write my system down. Like there was a time when I was very, and even to this day, there's times when, I have players who played for years and loved the fact that nothing was written down because everything was a negotiation in that sense of what a skill could do. If it like, what does a skill sound like it can do? So there's a skill that a player, and a lot of skills are player invented. Like there's a skill called walk in like I own the place. And that was a player invented that skill. And I was like, yeah, that's awesome. And then what does that do in a given situation? And like how far can you push that? And that was always a negotiation. When Daisy was like, I would like to write your system in a book, I was like, you can do that. But I had literally sworn off ever writing it down because I loved that that kind of open negotiation at the table. But when a lot of people who've come from other systems, people from Dungeons and Dragons, have never had a problem learning it, picking it up quick. The only thing that drives them crazy is the low roll, because you're trying to roll low because it's a roll under system, and that they have a hard time like realizing that a 1 is not a critical failure and that a 20 is not a critical make, and like that takes a minute for people. But besides that, people find it very intuitive. But when it came time to write it, and I've talked about this moment a lot, Daisy was like, there was a lot of stuff that she wanted to approach about how to make it more accessible and everything else. And I told her, I was like, whatever you need to do, you do. Like I am not, and I've learned this just in general. We run the center of our activities together these days are a pro GMing. So we run text games together for pay. That's my passion. That's what I love to do. That's the business I'm trying to build up and scale, is pay for play text games, which become like kind of an almost Uber experience for people who love TTRPGs. And so this was never the center of what I was going to do. But I've learned that in all these endeavors, in any endeavor, when it comes time to give it up, you got to give it up. If you're not willing to kill your babies in a creative project at all, then you can just kiss. Like if it's ego, and you're gonna let ego, like as much as I loved that aspect of it, when it was time to give it over to her, and I knew that she would take it in that direction, make it more accessible, make it feel like Dungeons and Dragons, because that is the biggest, market share by far, by categories of scale of TTRPG, and that's what she did, and I was impressed of how much she did. But originally it was neither like nor not like. Like people coming from D&D, and if they wanted a skill to work like that, then it worked like that, and if they wanted it to have like a broader meaning, then it had a broader meaning. It was always kind of a quick negotiation at the table.
Yeah, it's very cool. Yeah, I've played OSE game with GM Jordan. So like I've done one game where I like where it was roll under your thing, and yeah, the moment of like relearning that in your brain of like, wait, it's a 1, it's the best possible news. It takes a minute, but yeah, once you get there, you're like, okay, I understand the basics of math that I'm doing.
So a crit in our system is rolling right on the stat. So if your stat's a 16, like a dex, and you roll a 16, that is a critical success in our system, which affects the fate roll, can give you a bonus on the fate roll, can give you better 2 fate rolls. It's a little bit different. But I got that idea, that particular part of this, from Price is Right when I was a kid, when I was young. Seriously, because if you get right on the number, you get bonuses.
I didn't know that.
That's where I got the idea for if you get right on the number. And that still gave people a sense of like rolling higher. And then when we developed the melee system, like the offensive rating, and the offensive rating goes all the way up to 20. And if you're a fighter, you're going to be at 20 at level 10 or whatever. Then you actually do rolling a 20 is a crit, because that's where it's going to max out. So there you can still like capture a little bit of that. I rolled a 20, but I'll tell you, the real thing that kind of captures that critical success feeling is when you roll really high on fate. If you want to watch a tape, everybody loves that moment when that 20's rolled and everybody's screaming, oh my God. But I'll tell you, as crazy as that is, take a system like this and watch what happens when someone rolls a 99 or 100. Even a 95, even though the odds are exactly the same, a 95 to 100 feels better than rolling that 20, and it still has that kind of like that experience of, there's the roll of the dice and the game of chance, and it still captures those moments of we rolled that number and we made it happen.
Yeah, that's very fun. I should say, for the folks who don't know, it is a D20 and D100. Like, you're not abandoning your D20s if you have purchased 10,000 sets of dice. Me, who could be? Can you walk me through that sort of like initial D20 roll and then the D100 fate that sort of follows, how that mechanic works in... sorry, I have to call it the nut. The internet says the internet told me I do.
It's the nut, man. It's the nut. We're down. You want to describe it, Daisy, from your perspective?
Sure. Yeah. So, whenever, just like in D&D or in most TTRPGs, whenever a character or player wants to attempt an action or do something, they make a skill check. And skill check is we use that term very broadly. There are skills that have downright like magical effects sometimes. There are skills that can like contact beings from other realms or grant you like magical bonuses. But whenever you want to use a skill, you make a skill check, which would be with a D20, trying to roll equal to or lower than your skill. And then, depending on how that action affects the overall narrative, is when you would call for a fate roll. So if it's something like trying to spot a vendor in a crowd, that might not necessarily call for a fate roll. You can see, oh yeah, you spot a hat vendor down the road. But if you are, for instance, like trying to catch one of your party members who's falling off of a cliff, you might be able to succeed the dexterity check, but that fate roll might determine if you also go tumbling off the cliff with them, or if you're able to grab them and bring them back, or if you fall and manage to like hang onto the ledge by the edge of your fingers. There's a lot of nuances that can happen when you bring in that 100 different, levels of effect.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you mentioned, like you have that you can assign bonuses to the fate roll, like based off of the success of your D20 roll. My brain just fully stopped functioning. There we go. It's back. Because I was like, there was a thing that you said. Yeah. So you talked about like contacting a higher being. I know the one of the other books that you sent me was Expanding Cosmos, which immediately my thought was, oh, it's about like contacting higher beings, but it is considerably more than that. It's not just like, here's your like set of deities you can use, which would be, I think, wild if a game as sort of open-ended and player and like narrator descriptive was like, and here's the deities. But yeah, you have like the new classes and things coming into that. But what do you think Expanding Cosmos sort of not solves, but like what is the addition that you're looking for from the sort of the core nut?
Sure. So I think to touch on it, what you mentioned about not having gods, right? The if anyone goes out and checks out the manual, it is setting agnostic. We don't present a world or a set of gods or any specific kind of story that you have to use the system in. What we did do is present a sort of familiar core set of fantasy TTRPG classes. And that was intentional, sort of, as you said, to make the system familiar to folks who are coming in from Dungeons and Dragons, to make it as accessible as possible. That was something Josh and I talked a lot about, is the apprehension behind learning a new system and just trying to make it as easy to and welcoming as possible. The second thing with the Expanding Cosmos that we are trying to do is sort of bring in all of the other materials and all of the other player-made content that is presently on the Discord into a structured, formalized version like we were able to with the base edition manual. The base edition, it really is just that. It is the base set of rules for what you need to know how to run the game. It is a modular system, so we do present several different options for different things depending on how complicated you want various aspects of your game to be. But we really just, here is the base of what we think you need to run the game in our system. And from the expanding cosmos, we're going to bring in a bunch more classes that aren't just fantasy related. The first edition has a chef-like class in the food fighter. It has an engineer, which constructs buildings and devices. It has the slasher, which is a horror-themed Jason-esque type of class. And it has the urban druid, which instead of worshiping nature is a druid who feels more at home in the middle of a big thriving city. As well as one of the, I think, unique mechanics of the game, which are pseudo elementals, which I will let Josh describe what pseudo elementals are.
So 28 years, all my games are interconnected. So right now, Daisy and I run like 60 games, text games and live games, probably somewhere on the order of 75 games total. And everything that happens in one game affects all the others in little and big ways. So all the games are interconnected. Everything in my game at this point, my campaigns are player generated. All the plots, all the stories, all the companies, all the countries, everything has been created by players. And there was a player who wanted to. There was this guy who had created an armored vehicle for like personal vendetta reasons, and he wanted to.
As
like,
you do.
It's a true story. It happened in, I think it was Arkansas. But a bunch of banks said he owed a bunch of people money, thought he'd been messed around, and he took like heavy moving equipment, filled it with concrete, and started he would call the building and then bulldoze the buildings of everybody who had ticked him off, and they couldn't stop him. So they even thought about bringing in like airstrikes to stop him. And my player was like, I want to do that. So is there like a way to like capture like steel magic and concrete magic? I was like, no, but there should be. I was like, are you talking about like let's do pseudo elementals? So players have done stuff like this, like techno magic. Everybody wants to bring like modern technology and magic together. So pseudo elementals and pseudo fairies mediate between modern world and magic the same way that fairies and elementals mediate between the natural world and magic. So there are concrete elementals, concrete dragons, concrete fairies, steel elementals, gasoline elementals, and things like that. And there's an entire giant world that's set up around them, techno fairies and stuff like that. And I have just enormous amounts of lore going back where they come from and where they, all of it. And I have just creature after creature and an entire like monster manual worth of beings that are based on that idea. And it's very popular. People love it. People love, like I have plastic gnomes that are basically like plastic gnomes and entire stuff that's based around that. And the urban druid is kind of that same idea, instead of like they use gasoline and car batteries and mix it together and something called redneck thaumaturgy and stuff like that. And that's kind of the idea behind all that.
It's very fun. So there's like three things I want to talk about, but I'm going to try to go in a like order that makes sense in my brain, because I have at least the books open, like because the original classes before expanding cosmos: bard, charlatan, druid, fighter, mage, priest, rogue, which feels very like makes a lot of sense if you're used to the like classic structure. As someone who can't get enough delicious in dungeon, ooh boy, a cooking class sure sounds like a fun thing to play. I don't know if you've been watching the delightful anime on Netflix, but it's the premise is literally there's a guy who likes to cook monsters, and they're making their way through this like straight up D&D style dungeon of like it's multiple layers. There are these kinds of monsters, and he's like, here's how you cook a basilisk or whatever. And so like half of it is them like defeating the monster, and half of him preparing it for them. It's very, very fun. I sort of love that idea of obviously, like, I think any good GM is going to take what your players want and run with that, because otherwise, what are we doing? Like when the most recent game I had started, I was building out this city, and I was describing it as sort of like a New York City style. Like there were boroughs of like different places, and I was like trying to come up with names. And I was real proud of myself because Nine Hell's Kitchen is one of them, and I was just really pleased. And one of my players was like, "Well, I want to be like from the Feywild." And I was like, great, there's basically Central Park, but it's a like Feywild forest has sprung up in the middle of the city. And it's just dusk inside the park at all times. And I love that, like, yeah, like you have built a full structured universe around, like, oh, you want gasoline? You got gasoline. How I mean, is that is there something that you would? Is there like a line where you're like, okay, well, but not that, or is it always just like we'll see?
It's about who's playing. I mean, it's my job. Like this is this is my only job. This is what I do for a living. I believe what we're doing in the Discord, the text game stuff, is honestly the future of pro GMing. I think it's the only. I've done this for a long time. I've done it in a million different ways. I think it's how it's going to scale. I think there's potential here that people would blow people's minds. So certainly there's things I won't do. Like everybody on every consent form, every person puts a couple things that we all know are on every one, and it's almost like, why does that even have to be put? Are there people putting this into their games? Yeah, we all know. Like,
look, I'm on TikTok. There are people putting it into their games.
There will, but like, okay, right?
Yes.
There are, right? But like, though, like, no, I don't. I mean, I would be no. If someone's like, I want that in my game, I'd be like, no. Yeah. None of those. But if it's a group of people, I'm pretty broad. It might not be my favorite thing in the world to do, but I give people what they want, especially if it's because again, it's my job. You can't turn a lot of clients away. You can't. It's just not. You won't survive that way. You can't turn a lot of clients away. Now you can have over time find out that people are toxic and say, I can't work with you anymore. But you gotta try to give people what they want. So I don't have a lot of no's, but I have some no's. I mean, I think most people have no's.
Yeah. I am curious, like, like, obviously, if all of your games are interconnected and, there are, like, concrete and gasoline and other pseudo elementals, how that plays necessarily for folks who maybe want a more, like, traditional, like, Lord of the Rings style. I don't want cement in my games.
Sure.
I want thatched roofs and stone.
I do that too. I mean, I do that too. It's just you just have to have I mean, it's a multiverse. It's a multi of a multi. I have an omniverse, so I have multiverse of multiverses. People ask me that, like, because they'll see my interconnected games. They'll see these people have developed these like broad, even interplanetary, interdimensional kind of companies and stuff. They've spent years and multiple characters developing them, and they like, how do I put this in my game? And I tell people, go big. The mistake people make is they'll have they'll try it first with one island, with several groups. Timing on that is a pain in the butt. Making all of that connect properly. Don't go big. Make it the biggest setting you possibly can. It solves so many problems if you scale up rather than scale down. Don't start small. If you're going to try to create like tons of interconnected games, get it as big a setting as you can, and you'll be able to let these individual games develop. And then you would say, this is an opportunity. It's magic. You're going to have a way to bring them together. Space is not an issue. Time can be an issue, and it's a lot easier to have things desynchronized in time and still connect if the space is huge. You can't have a nuclear explosion on an island and have it not affect the other people. But you cannot, you know what I mean? Like, that's not going to work. So go
And
big.
God, what a bummer that would be if you were in the middle of a game, be like, "Hey, a game you didn't know was happening was on the other side of the island, and all your characters are dead now."
Even at this, I don't wipe characters out, but even at this scale,
Yeah.
people will have some bad stuff happen in their games because of what other people do. That's the cost of being involved in a project like that. But no, I have. If you want to see a really cool representation of this, someone go to my YouTube channel, and there's this one story of these people who are in this frozen wasteland, very medieval type of setting, very very low to the ground, and they fight this dragon that came from another game that is just massively powerful and has abilities they don't understand. Well, out of game, that was a Freon dragon, so it has the ability to manipulate thermodynamics, and that's why they they think they're fighting an ice dragon. They find out that this thing eats heat, so fire is no weapon against it, and they're encountering it as some alien cosmic force, right? That's how they encounter it. And I loved playing that game, and I really was proud of the way I was able to even draw. It was a group of people who did want that very low to the ground game, but I was able to draw this one element in from another game. It was just from their perspective. So if you have a mechanical giant go into a medieval game, you can have both of those things. You just have to think about it of how would those people encounter such a thing. For them, it's just like a cosmic event. Whereas that same dragon in another game is like a Tuesday. So it's
oh, man. What a bummer that other game is.
But it's you can even do stuff very subtle. You can keep them interconnected. You just have to be. But I do that all the time. It's whatever anybody wants. Like I said, people. So sometimes people want a real down to earth game. I give them a kind of an off corner of magic space with a planet that's what I call planarly distant. Doesn't have any portals on it, or has very few. And then so that's how I handle it.
Yeah, it's very cool. I know having seen a lot of discussion in the space, TTRPG space, of how do we make a living off of doing this? Discussion that happens a lot. I know you just mentioned text-based games and sort of being able to scale that. So sort of how does your system work for anyone who would be interested to hop into a game like that?
Yeah, I mean, you can get we do free intros on the server. It is a pay for play server. It's really cool because there is a place where you can at least go. If you buy the book, you can at least go play. It's interesting what you said, that I have this conversation all the time. I've been doing TTRPG. I say this all the time, is today where stand-up comedy was in the 80s and 90s. People are realizing that this is an art form. It's not just a game. It's a game, but it's not just a game. It is an art form, and everybody is struggling with what's. And I think this is mostly an unconscious conversation. It's interesting because you're one of the few people I've seen besides myself that's talking about it as something in the forefront. We're really all struggling with how do you monetize that? How do you professionalize that art form? Because there is no broadly accepted art form that isn't professionalized. There is none that's monetized. No widely culturally accepted art form does not have a professional class to it. And how do you monetize that? And a lot of people, they want to take their social media, they want to build up their actual play. And that's great on paper, but anybody, and I have a business background, I know business. It's a saturated market. It's not going to be broad. It's not going to make professional. It's not going to professionalize the art form in a broad way. It's just not. It's not possible. Then you have pro GMing. Pro GMing's a lot better. It's more viable. But the problem with pro GMing is you're going to work nights and weekends, and that's it. If you have a wife, if you have a family, you can kiss them goodbye. And I know this because that's what I did for a long time. I was strictly live. I'd go over to people's houses, and you can't scale it. You can't scale it. And you're also working for 2 or 3 hours at a time. So even getting enough hours together to have a decent living is a pain. The options that are out there to do this, some of the places we know that try to help these people who do this, it still doesn't solve the daylight problem. There's only so many hours in a day people can play TTRPGs, and scheduling is still a nightmare, even if you're a professional. So what text games allow people to do is check in whenever they want. So it can literally be a 9 to 5, and you can run a lot of games. People checking in 3 or 4 times a day. Everybody's still in a game. They experience a game. People love them, and it can open up voice chat games and live games as extras. And with this, there is an opportunity to monetize what people do at a scale that they can't even believe. It would blow your mind. It would blow your mind how much business came through our Discord last year and still comes through this year. And our next step is to scale it up. And there is an opportunity here. I've done a lot of research. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. This is the best chance that those people who have taken this art form, have made it their art form, have honed their skills. This is the best chance on a broad level to professionalize it. It just is. The numbers work, and it's something that you can do all day during the day, and you can work it 9 to 5, and it works.
Yeah. That makes obviously a ton of sense, especially, I mean, as you know, like obviously we're talking over, Riverside, but the Zoom of it all, boy, Zoom really fumbled that one. I was just like, you had it. Everyone was calling it a Zoom, and then you made the worst service.
Yes.
I say as my audio and video is completely out of sync, but whatever. It's fine. I pay Riverside so much a month and they can't get this figured out. I'm not bitter at all. But I like, even having played in some games with people just like in disparate, like I played with someone who was in South Africa and another person in the game was in Hawaii, and I was like, I don't know if your time zones could be farther apart and not just be like in the middle of the ocean somewhere. But yeah, I mean, the idea of like, oh well, I've got a text-based game that like I can pop in and out of when I have time is obviously, like you said, very appealing to people. Daisy, how did you come into sort of like that? Idea is not the right word, but like, how did you land in like, oh, this is a space that I also want to be in?
So Josh initially invited me into the server as a paid promotion for TikTok and social media, as a 2-week trial. And I'll tell you the moment. Josh and I sat down for my initial character creation, and there was a spot that says race, and we've since kind of done away with race being listed on the character sheets, or race is a mechanic in the game, but you can describe your character however you want. So I asked Josh, I was like, what can you play? He said, anything you want. I said, all right. And I thought for a second, and I was like, I honestly, I won't lie, I was trying to stump him. I was like, what's something that I can throw at this guy that's like he's not going to see coming? And I was like, all right, I want to play a giant anthropomorphic dung beetle. And he goes, all right. And from that moment, I was like, okay, because I come from a theater background, and one of my favorite models that I learned in college as a playwright was, if this is possible, then what else is possible? And I feel like it is a system that really embraces that. And like I said, I was sort of immediately hooked from that initial game. And especially as a writer and someone with a writing background, sometimes when I'm running live games, there is a little bit of that pressure to respond in the perfect way live and in the moment. And that can be a very difficult thing, even if you are an experienced dungeon master or game master or improver. So I think having that ability to read the responses, to see how the dice are rolled, and then just take a minute to be able to think about things and frame an answer was really appealing to me. And I feel like I am able to provide a better service that way as someone who runs games. So that's really what appealed to me about the text game server and the text gaming side of it. As also someone who has a fairly busy schedule day to day, it is a way that I can I can still play and enjoy games without having to set aside several hours during one of my only free nights of a week to play, right? Because scheduling is the bane of us all. And I think really when you are able to engage with the games on your own terms, if that's 5 or 10 minutes at a time throughout the day, it really sort of kind of takes the pressure off of it and makes things able to just enjoy it rather than sort of be sitting there like at the table going like, I know my animals need to be fed and there's so many different chores that need to be done right now. So yeah, that's really why I enjoy it.
Yeah. No. Oh yeah, Josh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, something I realized, I'm old. I came into TikTok. I mean, I was TikTok wasn't something I wanted to do, but I knew that if I was going to grow my business, people were pushing me to do it, so I did it, and I'm glad I did. It's still not something that comes natural to me. I mean, I'm just personally, I don't love social media. It's not something I grew up with. It's not something that I do it because I have to. I mean, that's the truth. I've met some great people, and I'm thankful for all of that. It's just day to day. It's not something. I still feel like I'm dropped in another world, right? But looking through TikTok, looking through responses, people want to play. That's what a lot of people who are watching these people who have 500,000, a million followers, what they want to do is they want to play. They want to play with those people. That's what they want. That's the product that they're looking for. They're not looking for merch. They're not looking for another t-shirt. They're not looking for dice. They want to play with those people. And it is for those people who have those big followings, that is an untapped market because you can't play with them. You couldn't fill enough time and charge them enough to make it worth it. But imagine if you could, like we have some plans. Imagine if you just check in on your phone for an hour a day and you could check in with 20, 30 or a couple hours a day, whatever of your followers who are paying to that extra service to be able to play a game with you. It is a path to monetization for people in a way, especially on TikTok and Instagram too. I see a lot of people who are creating $1 million commercials for $1 billion company. That's what they're doing. Each and every day, 500 to 1,000 times a day. The amount of money that the big companies, I don't want to name, that run TTRPGs are making off of creators.
Who could you be talking about?
Right. Off of creators is mind-blowing. People I don't think creators realize how much money they're just making off of them. They are providing for free commercials that used to cost these companies millions and millions of dollars. And that is what's happening. And they are making nothing off of that. They aren't even if they're not making this. I know a creator I work with all the time. She's amazing. She's done great work for me. She has helped make me as successful as I am 100%. And I was having a conversation with her, and I am by far her primary source of income in the social media space. And that's insane because she is each and every day almost making, again, incredible commercials for a company that is making, I guarantee you, more than she could probably imagine off of the work she's doing. And finding a way to free that up and make it something that the creators are benefiting from too is one of my goals. It's not too strong to call it a passion because I, as a business person, I'm a small business. I ain't making millions. But I sit back and I watch all these people creating all this content, and I see this as I see it at when Fred Astaire and Arthur Murray professionalized dance, and they did it the way they did it by making professional dancers, some of the best dancers in the world, teachers. Most people can't get vocal lessons with Taylor Swift, but you can get personal lessons with some of the best dancers in the world that are like ballroom dancers and partner dancers. You can dance with them and you can learn from them. And that's a real thing. It's insane. Like for those people, I've taken lessons with some of the biggest names in dance because it's something I love to do. And that's available. Arthur Murray and Fred Astaire professionalize the art form that way. And I see something necessary, similar in the TTRPG space to properly professionalize it. And I think I know that a text game based system where people are getting to interact with those players on that level and under the auspices of professional GMing is something is going to be what opens that up. I do believe that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can say like I've even in like obviously like non-paid attempting to just like, hey, let's play a game together. It's gonna take 3 to 5 sessions, and still like scheduling fell apart and we never got to play. And it's like this was gonna last less than a month, and like we still ran out. We still couldn't find a time that everyone could agree to. And as someone with a 2-year-old, that I was the problem, because I was like, well, no, I'm not giving up my like evenings when I'm with my son. Like I don't get to see him most of the day because I'm sitting in front of a computer not doing fun things. But yeah, I think it's really interesting, and like something that obviously like I think a lot about, because my channel I talk mostly about like Dropout, Dimension 20 kind of stuff. And it's sort of like the advice that Sam Reich, CEO of Dropout, had like given not to me, but like in general, was like, you got to figure out how to get people off of social media and onto a place where they're giving you money, if you want to like be successful in this. He's like, we take our clips from our shows and put them on TikTok to drive people to dropout.tv. Like we're not trying to make money on TikTok. And it's sort of like changed every way that I was thinking about what I was doing. It's like, got it. I need to make a Patreon that allows people to like support me, because I can't just be like, okay, what video can I make this month that people might enjoy enough that it will like allow me to live? I also have a regular 9 to 5. I'm not in danger at this point. But yeah, I do think like it's really interesting to think about like like getting those games at scale is really interesting. And one of the other things that Daisy, you mentioned, of like getting to take a beat between like a story point, because it's one of the things that as someone who listens to NADPod, they talk about pretty regularly of like, hey, like home game masters, like you don't have to, like if your players do something so wild that you're like, I wasn't prepared for this, you don't have to be like, we have to keep going this instant. Like you can be like, hey guys, I need a break. Like we need a timeout here. I need to go like reset. And like obviously like with a text-based game, that's just literally built in. You don't even have to be like, hey, timeout. I need a minute. You can just be like, I'll just answer this when I've figured out the answer to the Freon dragon. It sort of like really leans into, I think, a lot of problems in the space of like people see a Matt Mercer, Brandley Mulligan, a Bria Iyengar, and are like, I have to be as good as them. They don't ever pause in their games. I've got to be that good, which is untenable. And yeah, like, but yeah, there was no question in there, and for that I apologize. How about an actual question?
No, I still saw where you're going, and I think that it can't. The art form can't be unpaid people, Matt Mercer. That's not professionalizing the art form, and that's what people are all like planning on doing. And if that's the plan for the hobby, it ain't going anywhere as a professional art form. It's not. There has to be something in that middle area, and there has to be a range, just like there is in music, just like there is in art, just like there is in a million other things. There has to be a range. It's that middle area that is mostly empty. It's I do this and get as if it were a job almost, and don't get paid, or Matt or Mercer and Dimension 20 and all that. Like that center space is basically a wide open space. Again, there's people doing professional GMing, but doing it at night and at weekends, it's not going to work. It just I know it won't work.
Yeah.
I personally, I know maybe a handful of like specifically Dungeons and Dragons and TTRPG creators who are able to make their living specifically purely through their content and their work there. The other people that do it full time have some sort of side business or side job, or the vast majority of us also have a different or several different jobs that we are just just trying to string things along together here. So I think that yeah, what we're now trying to work towards is expanding a little bit and trying to figure out how do we not only expand our community with the people that we currently have on board, but how do we create a system there we can bring other creators and other people who want to be professional GMs on board to start running their own games. Because like we all know, there are many more people that want to play games than want to run games. And especially for content creators, there's a lot of people in their audiences who would love to help support them and play games with them at the same time. So I think it's a very exciting opportunity that we're trying to work on and trying to crack.
Yeah. So it's so interesting and such like a fun, not even thought experiment, because obviously like it exists beyond thought experiment at this point for both of you. But just like that thought of like, okay, what is in the middle of sort of like, I live my life like however I want, because a million people would subscribe to whatever I do, and I'm working nonstop just playing games with my friends, trying to figure out how do I do this. I do want to hop back in, because like obviously with the narrative universe you get like you both describe really pretty wild things of like a Freon dragon, a giant anthropomorphic dung beetle. Give me some of your weirdest stories you've had sort of shape their way out. Josh is leaning forward, ready to answer this question.
It's just it's hard. It's hard to pick. I've had people who played like living clothes that if someone put on, they were cursed and they would attack them. I've had people be conscious in fog. I've had people play two heads on the same ogre. I just recently I had someone who was given pixie dust. We do an actual play on Wednesday, which is to bring people into the community. And I told the person they were a creator, and I was like, we're pretty raunchy, like we're R-rated, like we're pretty nuts. And I was like, are you cool with that? Are you sure you're cool with that? And then it came up where a pixie dropped some pixie dust, and they're like, she goes, what else can you do with it? They took out a straw and started snorting, and she went right with them. I was like, yeah, this is one of us right here. So yeah, like you name it, people on a tugboat trying to catch Godzilla, like Godzilla hunters on a tugboat. I mean, you name it, it's probably been done. People will go, I'll see TikTokers all the time. Like, we had the craziest story, and then they'll tell a story. I was like, yeah, I've done that. Like, I've done it. Like, there aren't many things that I haven't done at this point, because I've been doing it for 10 years professionally. So, I've seen South Park, like everything. People played in every world, every setup. So yeah, those are some crazy ones.
For me, I had the dung beetle. I had the gelatinous cube that absorbed a lucha libre wrestler, and so became like a Stretch Armstrong lucha libre wrestler. I had a chicken who was just a chicken, but had slowly gained like Looney Tunes-esque powers of like not being able to be killed because it would just like splat and then like peel itself back up from a cliff. But while the system really does lend itself to like that sort of wacky madcap style really, really well, you can also get these really beautifully emotional stories from it. I had a game that just ended on stream where it was taking place at a pub where when a god's universe died, the god would end up at this pub at the end of the universe to like hang out. And at the end of the game, they ended up like ending this entire sequence of multiverses and giving birth to this brand new universe in the end. And it was just this moment where because everyone was just so connected at the table, and the dice rolls were just able to really enhance the story. It created this really beautiful emotional ending that honestly is probably one of my favorite endings, certainly for any game that I have personally run, my favorite ending for a campaign.
Josh, do you have any that jump out at you of a personal favorites? Doesn't have to be weird.
Oh man, there's some that are really personal. Like I had a friend who passed away, and I remember them taking him and turning him into a planet. The other players at the table, and years later he came into another game like as an NPC and played kind of a self-sacrificial savior figure, and that was I was crying. Like,
yeah,
crying doesn't cover it. There have been so many times when there was two brothers. I do young people's games too. I've got kids I've played now since they're 10 and they're 20 now. They're still playing games. And they were stepbrothers. And they're and I watched them over the course of a game. It was the pandemic, and parents didn't know what to do with at all, so they just gave I ran Dungeons and Dragons 10 hours a day, 7 days a week for 3 flipping months, and most of the 3 months after that too. And these two boys, that's all they did all the time. And that one of them was playing this character named Shoop de Whoop, who is obsessed with the meme, I'm a firing my laser. And the other was playing a box troll that worshipped him. And he was the younger brother. He looked up to him, and they like fused together and became this god called Mac and Cheese, which is this floating bowl of mac and cheese that fires orbital lasers. And that's, silly and crazy. But I watched them over the course of those months with those characters become brothers. If you watch them today and you were around them, you would not believe they were anything other than blood brothers who had lived their whole life. And I play with them all the time. I just got done with the game right before we got on. I was in a game with them. They play all the time. And you have never seen a more beautiful relationship, and it formed around those games. So all of those characters with those two brothers, anything I play with them, because they became not but brothers through that experience, and that's a huge part of my life.
It's amazing. This has been absolutely delightful. If folks out there want to find out more about the narrative universe, it's so hard not to call it the Nut, or the Discord, or whatever. Yeah, where can they? There's no way that anyone who's watching this doesn't know where to find Daisy on the internet, because for sure the Venn diagram is like Daisy and then like me. But
says the man who interviewed Sam Reich last week.
I did interview Sam Reich last week.
Congratulations, by the way. That's super
thank
cool.
you very much. It was very fun. It was very fun because literally in the interview, I was like, I took your advice and I started a Patreon. He's like, you took my advice and you're talking about my company. It's a very like weird meta, like I've taken your advice, but also your ideas. But yes, where can the folks at home find you and find the Nut as well as the Discord, everything that they want in this?
Yeah, so if you look up Narrative Universe TTRPG on any of your favorite social media platforms, you should be able to find our new channels. We, as you said, we're also on Discord. Our manuals are available currently as a downloadable PDF on itch.io, on DriveThruRPG, and on Amazon Kindle. And you can find links to our Discord on the Narrative Universe TTRPG channels, as well as my own social media channels if you follow my personal links.
Great.
And you can find me on TikTok, Narrative Universe, Instagram, Narrative Universe. You can find me Orsak Narrative Universe on YouTube and Twitch. And it's really easy to find our Discord. It's just the normal kind of Discord invite, discord.dg. And then it's like the invite part is Narrative Universe. So literally it's just the word Narrative Universe. Really easy to find us. and come by, get a week. We do a week free intro game, and you can go from there. It's a great community. There's a lot of great people there. It's a lot of fun. And if you want to experience the narrative universe, then it's a good way to do that.
Amazing. Daisy, Josh, thank you again for supporting Docs Without Borders and for hanging out with me for the last hour. This has been absolutely delightful. And I'll let you in on a thing. I don't know how to end interviews, so I usually just hit stop recording. So,
okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.